Motrolics.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Chevy Society Podcast, the show where we discuss all things about the Bowtie brand. On the show today, will the C8 ZR1 make even more power? And also the C8 Zora. I'm your host, G, and joining us is GMauthority.com executive editor, Alex Luft.
Hey, G, great to be back.
Great to see you again, man. So your team at GMauthority.com recently published some interesting reports about the ZR1 and the Zora. First, tell me about the ZR1.
Okay, so we did a whole episode on the ZR1, right? And one of the key features of the C8 ZR1 is that it has 1,064 horsepower.
Very sexy like last time, but apparently
it might be more.
Really?
It's going to be more. So here's what's taking place. We're hearing through our sources that the official power rating for the ZR1 will be even higher once it launches. So the way this came about, and I know there will be, I'm going to ruffle some feathers with this info as we have with the articles that we've written. But essentially the 1,064 horsepower figure, this is an estimated figure. It is based on SAE testing methodology. And the way that Chevy puts it, if you read the press release very carefully, which is, the official source of the information, during in the press release, Chevy says that the number is per SAE guidelines. And this is particularly important, this per SAE guidelines bit, because it means that the numbers have yet to be officially certified by the SAE, and therefore could very well change compared to the estimate. The estimate is also based on SAE metrics, SAE standards, SAE testing methodology, all of that. But, between announcement and production, there's a whole lot of validation that's taking place. There is stuff that's outside of validation that's taking place. And, all the T's get crossed, the I's get dotted. There's a lot of things that are still taking place. And that's where we're going to see that number change. But essentially, it will very likely be higher than 1,064. And so it's quite significant because even at 1,064 horsepower, the C8 ZR1 is not only the most powerful Corvette ever, but it's also the most powerful V8 ever produced in America from an auto manufacturer. And, just to put that in perspective, that just the 1,064 horsepower figure, the LT7 that we're talking about here, twin turbo, 5.5 liter, flat plane crank, dual overhead cam, all that stuff. So the LT7 produces more power than two LS7 engines. That's the legendary 7-liter LS7 V8 that was in the 6th gen Corvette Z06. So it has essentially one LS7. The C8 ZR1 has one LS7 per bank at 1,064 horsepower. Just imagine if that figure is now, let's say, 1,100 horsepower.
Well,
36 horsepower more. I mean, it's not that much more when we're talking about those kinds of figures.
but you're clearing astronomical numbers from a production vehicle.
Yeah, and this is pump gas. This isn't, specialty fuel, racing fuel, none of that stuff. It's pump gas.
Take the kids in the morning.
Yep.
Race down to work.
Yep.
Enjoy your drive.
Mm-hmm. You can only have one kid though, so it's only a two-seater.
Yeah, dude, I don't think you're having.
There's no trunk, unlike in the C7. Where you can at least put someone in the trunk if you really need to. If you really need to get somewhere in a pinch and you have more than one passenger,
shove them back.
You can shove them in the back.
Not this.
It's not comfortable, but it gets the job done. You're not putting anyone in that trunk behind the rear engine compartment in the C8.
But the horsepower and the torque is covered.
Oh, yeah. No, you'll get there faster. So maybe you can make two trips.
That'll work.
Come back, pick them up.
There you go. That'll work.
Yeah.
That'll work.
I should also note that some might ask, well, who are we to be reporting on this stuff? Well, as far back as 2020, I should remind our listeners, as far back as 2020, GMauthority.com was at the forefront of reporting on the C8 Corvette. We very correctly predicted the entire, essentially the entire C8 generation lineup, starting with the Stingray, then going to the E-Ray, going to the Z06, and now the ZR1, and then beyond that, the Zora. And speaking of the Zora, it is coming, but there is some mystery about the car that I really was hoping to discuss. So first and foremost, we did recently, just last week, we got some spy shots of the Zora as it was testing on the famed Nürburgring track in Germany. And of course, those shots provided us with a pretty good idea of what we can expect. And essentially what we see here is the ZR1 with the ZTK aero package. So the big wing, all the stuff that the ZTK brings, at least from what it seems like from the photos. But there are a few interesting things here as well. So the spy shots, as they have before the Zora went to the ring, it will have a hybrid powertrain setup, and you can tell that it will have this setup by looking at the radiator on the driver's side. So if you look at that lower intake, you'll see that it has kind of a two-piece radiator design. And the reason for that, and this is different from the ZR1, this is different from the Z06, this is different from the Stingray. The reason for that is this is the same kind of setup as on the E-Ray. So part of that front radiator there, it provides cooling to the front-mounted electric drive unit, essentially the electric motor that's at the front, which, of course, delivers power to the front wheels, thereby delivering all-wheel drive. And this is very much, the cooling itself is very similar to what we see on the C8 E-Ray. But unlike the E-Ray, the Zora will replace the LT2 that's in the E-Ray. So that's the naturally aspirated 6.2 liter small block overhead valve V8 engine. The E-Ray mates the LT2 with the hybrid electric setup at the front, essentially the front motor at the front axle. Instead of that, the Zora will have the LT7 from the ZR1 mated to a front drive unit as well. And that will probably mean that the Zora will be the most powerful variant of the C8. So that 1,064 horsepower or more figure, the Zora will probably eclipse that, making it, again, the most powerful C8 in the family.
You're getting all-wheel drive with this, correct? Yeah. Is this the first in that lineup of all-wheel drive?
Well, the E-Ray already has that, right? Okay. That the E-Ray is essentially that. It's the first all-wheel drive Corvette. You could technically drive it with the front motor only, meaning with front-wheel drive as well. It's for low speed, parking. You don't want to start up the engine. You want to park it somewhere. So it kind of gives you the ability to, not wake up your whole family.
Like get home quiet.
Right? Just roll out quietly. So the E-Ray already has all-wheel drive covered. It has the front-wheel drive, temporary electric front-wheel drive bit covered as well. But now this is going to, the LT7 with all of the cooling that the LT7 provides, with all of the downforce related stuff that the ZTK package provides. And there's one interesting thing that has really had some people perplexed about the Zora, and that is that really when Tad Juchter, which of course has been the Corvette executive chief engineer for as long as I can remember at least, he indicated in a recent interview that the ZR1, not the Zora, which has yet to be revealed, yet to be announced. Chevy hasn't. We're talking about a future product here that Chevy has simply not even commented on, right? But Taj, in an interview with Car and Driver back in August, said that the ZR1 will be the most expensive model in the C8 lineup. And this is the part that's had people perplexed. How is the ZR1 the most expensive in the lineup if there's going to be a model that is more powerful than the ZR1, which is the Zora. It doesn't really make much sense. So one explanation that kind of seems to tick all of the boxes and make sense is that the Zora will be a decontended model, a decontended vehicle in the name of outright track performance. And of course, by decontended, what I mean is essentially the deletion of several features to decrease weight and also decrease cost, thereby giving the Zora great, again, track focus, but also keeping it in line with the comments that the ZR1 will still be the most expensive C8. So if you take some features away, it might still end up being that the ZR1 will be the most expensive one. So some items for, I'd say, that would be ripe for removal would be things like the ADAS systems, so the driver assistance systems, the advanced driver assistance systems. They could toss those for a track car, all the sensors that go along with it, all of the, not only sensors, but also the things that indicate whatever it is that you're doing, blind spot, that can get tossed, following distance indicator, that can get tossed. All that stuff can get tossed, all the nannies, so to speak, right? The wireless phone charger, probably don't need that on the track, right? All kinds of sound absorption and sound deadening materials, those can go away. And there's also an opportunity to replace typical features with lighter ones. And not lighter ones like in the case of, going to a very expensive material, but I don't know, things like, for instance, the glass, right? They could go to a glass that's thinner, that has less sound absorption properties, less UV properties, less whatever, that kind of stuff. They could go to race-specific seats. Like, in fact, if you look closely, the Zora that was caught testing around the ring, that unit is running racecraft seats in it. And so that's already, it's already there. Maybe those seats are lighter than the ones that are offered in the C8 lineup as a whole. So there's opportunities, essentially. That's my point. And we have seen this kind of approach in the past. In fact, the fifth generation Camaro, which was lightened by a whopping 300 pounds compared to the Camaro ZL1, again, the fifth generation Camaro ZL1, it was lighter, made lighter through the elimination of interior sound deadening materials, the trunk carpet, and got rid of HID headlights, and got rid of AC, and thinner glass at the rear. So essentially all of those things combined allowed engineers to shed a whopping 300 pounds and thereby making the Z28, which was, that's a huge achievement. Just by removing a few things here and there, you got, a lighter car. Now, it's also worth mentioning that, at least so far, we've only seen prototypes of the Zora in the coupe body style. So we have not seen any convertibles around ever. And if that's the case, that would make sense. It would make sense with the notion that, the Zora would be a track only or a track focused kind of a vehicle. It wouldn't be a grand tourer like the ZR1 is. The ZR1 you could take to the track. You could also drive it on the road, do a cross-country trip with it, long-distance trip, whatever. The Zora would be focused on the track and therefore shed some weight, shed some of that stuff. This is all speculation, right? But it's just my theory as to how, where they can position the Zora. So essentially, that would also coincide with and go along with the notion of no convertible. Convertible is heavier. Convertible needs all kinds of other materials that are more expensive. If you're going to the track, you don't need a convertible. You're going to be doing, you're going to be driving with the top up. So coupe only. And that kind of, it lines up with what we've seen thus far, coupes only.
It makes sense that they're pushing in this direction with this vehicle specifically. The way that you've kind of like brought it together, look, this is an all-wheel drive possibly pushing over quite a bit over the ZR1 in terms of horsepower and torque. You're dealing with all these elements that you can bring to a track. You have a driver you can drive around in the ZR1 if you want to take it on trips. This fits, I guess, that part of the market that is just racetrack enthusiasts.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it would be, we don't know how much the ZR1 would cost yet. You know, last time we spoke about it, we thought, you know, it would be between 150 and 175 starting. I think your estimate was 175. I could very well see this being 150K, you know, the Zora, stripped out, all the luxury / comfort features, you know, power seats, all that stuff, vented seats, heated seats, all that gets stripped out. Heated steering wheel gets thrown out. All that stuff gets thrown out. And, you know, essentially it will be a track-focused vehicle. Similar to, you know, I guess we could say that the 911 GT3 is in that realm, you know. I guess you could, if you really wanted to, you could use the 911 GT3 as a daily driver, but maybe you really don't like yourself that much if you do, you know, if you do that. Because that's a, you know, that's a recipe for breaking teeth.
But for 150 grand, possibly, this is an amazing car to show up with at the track. I mean, it gets you there and it gets you performing very well.
This would be from the very get-go, you know, from back in 2020, so 4 years ago now, when I reported on the C8 lineup and Chevy's plans per our sources, Chevy's plans for the C8 range as a whole. The Zora was always, it was always described to me as being like the final word in performance. It was going to be, you know, no nonsense performance. And it was going to be a statement-making car. Not a statement-making car for the owners, per se, but a statement-making car for Chevy and for General Motors. To show the rest of the world, you know, the exotics out there, the, you know, Porsche, right? To show them exactly how to do a track-focused vehicle and one that would beat the competition that costs often not only twice as much, but 3, 4, 5, 6
those Porsches were
times
insane.
as much. Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about $300,000 and up on some of them.
I mean, it depends on the model, yeah. But if you get the GT3, it's a little tough to say because you have the dealer markups still on the, you know, the GT2s. You still had them, and the GT3s now you still have them from what I know. But essentially, yes, this would be the Zora would be a track focused thing. And one other little anecdote that kind of fits into this notion, this belief that, you know, the Zora would be a track focused thing, is that Zora Arcus Duntov, so, you know, the father of the Corvette, obviously who the car would be named after, he was a racer. And he was a racer who dreamed of turning the Corvette into a world-beating race car. So adding more power and more torque via the front-mounted electric motor, removing the weight that's not necessary at the track, those two together would, you know, they're pretty good ingredients for a recipe that would deliver the ultimate track monster. And I think something that would do Zora proud. So in that regard, that's why the Zora doesn't necessarily have to be the most expensive C8. The ZR1 could still occupy that spot, but the Zora could be the most powerful, but less feature-rich. It would be specific to the track.
It makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense, especially with just the layout of what they've been unfolding, the conversations we've had multiple times throughout the years. For me, my ignorance, I was constantly questioning, why go to a mid-engine? Why do all these things?
Me too.
I mean, you had normally, you know, a few more answers than I had questions for, but this is the cherry on top, the final chess move.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. What kind of power would we be looking at?
For the Zora?
Potentially.
So we can take our 1,064 current horsepower, right, as announced, horsepower in the ZR1 from the LT7. And we could do some very crude math. Now, everything I'm about to say is just, this is actually not from any sources. This is just me doing very crude levels of math. But if you took the LT7 with its 1,064 horsepower, again, as announced, as we discussed earlier, that actually might be higher. Probably very much will be higher. You take that and you add on the E-Ray's front drive unit, the electric motor. Now that unit adds 160 horsepower and 122 pound-feet of torque. And so you add that to the LT7 in its current estimated output of 1,064 horsepower, and what you would get is 1,224 horsepower and 950 pound-feet of torque.
That's nice to show up at the track with.
Yeah.
Possibly, if these numbers hold true.
I mean, anything over 1,000 would be nice, right? So that's the crude math. Like 1,224 horsepower, 1,200. I mean, again, this is guesswork numbers. These are not announced. Heck, the Zora hasn't been announced or pre-announced or even hinted at, right, by Chevy, by GM, by anybody. But we know it's coming. We know it's coming. You have to, you have to have been buried under a rock for the past 5 years to think that it's not. So that's really it. Two things. One is, more power for the ZR1 once everything has been said and done from a actual, not estimated, but fully fledged rated power for the ZR1, and how the Zora could be still the most powerful of the C8s, but not the most expensive. That's my theory on that one.
I like it. I like it a lot. A lot to look forward to. So, once again, thank you all for joining us on the 4th episode of the Chevy Society Podcast. You can find this show on the Metrolix Network YouTube channel and on ChevySociety.com. If you're watching on YouTube, then remember to hit that like button and give us a follow to get the latest episodes. We're currently working on getting this show into your favorite podcatchers. So if you don't see it in a podcatcher app yet, just give us a few days and we'll get that taken care of. Stay tuned next week for episode 5 of the Chevy Society Podcast, where we'll discuss Silverado sales performance. Don't forget to visit gmauthority.com for the latest GM news.
Motrolix.